The first time my phone went dead, I was halfway up a ladder with a wrench in my mouth and an HOA violation notice taped to my chest like a warning label. By the time I climbed back down, 3 bars of service had vanished. My voicemail was full of threats, and the neighborhood Facebook group was already calling me a terrorist. All because of an antenna, a perfectly legal antenna, and a woman who thought gravity answered to her clipboard. I live at the edge of the subdivision, where the manicured lawns stop pretending they aren't afraid of dirt, and the cell signal has always been a little fragile. When I bought the place, I knew reception was bad. Calls dropped, texts stalled, data crawled like it was tired. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I installed a small signal booster with a slim antenna mounted on a pole behind my garage. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It didn't glow or hum or point lasers at the sky. It just stood there quietly doing its job. For 6 months, nobody noticed. Not the HOA. Not my neighbors. Not even the woman who would later claim she noticed everything. Her name was Linda. Everyone called her Linda. Nobody ever added a last name, like she was a hurricane or a disease that didn't need clarification. She ran the HOA with the confidence of someone who had never been told no and the curiosity of someone who believed every rule applied to everyone else first. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped into my mailbox like a parking ticket. HOA notice of noncompliance. Antenna height violation. Immediate correction required. I laughed when I read it. Actually laughed. Out loud. The antenna wasn't visible from the street. It didn't exceed any county or FCC limit. I'd checked. Twice. I tossed the letter on the counter and went to work. That was my first mistake. The second letter came 3 days later. This one was laminated. I found Linda in my driveway that evening, standing too close to my garage, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. She smiled the way people smile when they're about to enjoy something unpleasant. "That needs to come down," she said, pointing at the antenna without looking at me. I asked what she was talking about. She sighed like I'd disappointed her personally. "The antenna. It exceeds HOA height restrictions." I told her there were no HOA height restrictions for antennas. I told her federal law protected them. I told her I had permits. She flipped a page on her clipboard and said, "The HOA voted." That was the moment I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about power. I asked when the vote happened. She said last night. I asked who voted. She said the board. I asked if I could see the minutes. She said they weren't finalized. She leaned closer and lowered her voice. "You have 48 hours. Then she left, heels clicking, clipboard tucked under her arm like a trophy. I should have fought it immediately. Filed paperwork. Made calls. Instead, I decided to wait. I figured reason would eventually win. After all, nobody else had complained. Nobody else even cared. The third letter came the next morning. Final notice. That afternoon, my phone lost service completely. No bars. No emergency calls. No data. Nothing. I walked around the house holding it up like a divining rod. Dead everywhere. Even outside. I reset it. Restarted it. Swapped SIM cards. Nothing. I drove 2 blocks down the road, and suddenly my phone exploded with missed calls and texts. Neighbors asking if I knew what was going on. My boss asking why I'd vanished. My mother asking if I was alive. Back home, silence again. That's when the Facebook post started. "Does anyone else have 0 signal today? My internet is fine but my phone is useless. I missed a medical call because of this. Someone needs to fix this now." Linda replied to every comment with the same sentence. "The HOA is aware of an unauthorized structure interfering with community services." Interfering. I walked outside and stared at my antenna. It hadn't moved. It hadn't grown. It hadn't changed. But somehow, overnight, the entire neighborhood's cell service had collapsed. That night, there was a knock at my door. 3 neighbors stood on my porch, phones in their hands like broken tools. They weren't angry yet. Just confused. They asked if I'd done something with my antenna. I told them no. I told them I hadn't touched it. I told them it couldn't affect anyone else. They believed me. Mostly. An hour later, Linda showed up with 2 board members and a measuring tape. She didn't knock. She announced herself. "The HOA is exercising emergency authority," she said, stepping onto my lawn without waiting for permission. I told her to leave. She measured anyway. She declared the antenna non-compliant. She informed me the HOA would pursue enforcement actions. I asked her if she'd noticed the neighborhood had no cell service. She smiled. Yes. I asked if she'd done something. She tilted her head. We upgraded. That word stuck with me. Upgraded. I watched as she walked away, confident, calm, certain she'd won something. Later that night, I climbed the ladder again. Not to remove the antenna. To inspect it. Everything was intact. Nothing had been tampered with. But in the distance, near the clubhouse, I noticed something new. A temporary structure. A pole. Taller than mine. Wrapped in cables. Pointed directly at the sky. I didn't understand it yet. I just knew one thing. Linda hadn't taken my antenna down. She'd tried to make it irrelevant. And in doing so, she'd broken something much bigger than she realized. By morning, the neighborhood would panic. By evening, they'd be angry. And by the end of the week, everyone would be asking the same question. Why did the signal die the moment the HOA got involved? And why did it only come back when I left the neighborhood? I went to bed knowing sleep wouldn't come easily. Because whatever game Linda thought she was playing, she'd just forced me to play too. By morning, the neighborhood had turned feral. I woke up to shouting outside, not the dramatic kind you hear in movies, but the sharp, irritated noise of people who had been inconvenienced for too long. My phone still showed nothing. No bars. No emergency call indicator. Just a useless glass rectangle reflecting my own annoyed face back at me. I stepped onto the porch and immediately got ambushed. Mrs. Calder from across the street waved her phone at me like it was evidence. A delivery driver sat idling at the curb, arguing with his dispatcher through a speaker that kept cutting out. 2 teenagers stood on the sidewalk holding their phones up toward the sky, spinning slowly like they were summoning rain. Someone shouted my name. Someone else shouted antenna. Someone else shouted HOA. I raised my hands and told everyone the same thing. I hadn't changed anything. I hadn't touched my equipment. I was just as offline as they were. That helped a little. Not much. Around 10, Linda sent out a neighborhood-wide email. I couldn't read it at home. I had to drive to the grocery store parking lot just to load it. The subject line was cheerful in a way that made my jaw tighten. Community Infrastructure Update. She wrote that the HOA had installed a temporary signal management device to improve neighborhood aesthetics and safety. She assured everyone that service interruptions were normal during upgrades. She added that unauthorized antennas could cause interference and liability issues. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. By noon, people stopped asking questions and started forming opinions. I heard them as I walked the block, voices dropping when I passed, conversations restarting behind me. Someone muttered that I was selfish. Someone else said I was trying to boost my own signal at everyone else's expense. I knocked on 3 doors and explained myself anyway. I showed permits. I showed screenshots. I even pulled up FCC guidelines on my tablet, standing awkwardly on porches while dogs barked behind screen doors. Some people listened. Some nodded. Some just wanted their phones back. Around 2, the first Real crack appeared. Mr. Hanley, who worked from home and never raised his voice, marched straight into the HOA office. I only know because he called me from the grocery store parking lot, his voice breaking through in angry fragments. They admitted it, he said. They rerouted something. Some kind of signal repeater. They said it's temporary. Temporary was becoming Linda's favorite word. That evening, the sheriff came by. Not lights and sirens. Just a slow roll up the driveway and a polite knock. He looked tired. The kind of tired you get from being dragged into nonsense disputes by people with too much free time. He asked about the antenna. I showed him everything. He nodded. He admitted he didn't know much about signal equipment. He admitted the HOA had called earlier, claiming my setup was interfering with emergency services. That got my attention. I told him my signal booster didn't transmit outward. I told him it couldn't block anything. I told him if emergency services were affected, something else was very wrong. He believed me. Or at least he believed I believed myself. Before he left, he said something that stuck. If they touched infrastructure they don't own, this gets complicated. After he drove off, I walked down toward the clubhouse again. The temporary pole was still there, humming faintly, wrapped in warning tape like it was pretending to be official. A small sign hung from it. HOA property. Do not tamper. It was taller than mine. By a lot. I took photos. Lots of them. From different angles. With timestamps. With landmarks in frame. Linda caught me. She emerged from the clubhouse like she'd been waiting, arms crossed, smile already loaded. You're not authorized to document HOA equipment, she said. I asked if she was authorized to install it. She said the board approved it. I asked if the board owned the land it was on. She said it was community land. I asked if community land was zoned for telecommunications equipment. She didn't answer that one. Instead, she stepped closer and lowered her voice. You're causing unrest. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The absurdity finally broke through. You killed cell service for 200 homes, I said. And you're blaming a pole behind my garage. Her smile tightened. You could make this stop. I asked how. She pointed toward my house. Lower the antenna. That was the moment I understood the plan. She wasn't trying to fix anything. She was applying pressure. Starving the neighborhood of service until they turned on me. Until I caved. Until I became the problem everyone wanted gone. I told her no. I told her I wouldn't touch it. Her face hardened, just for a second, before the smile came back. Then we'll continue. That night, the neighborhood erupted. Someone's medical alert system failed. Someone missed a call from a hospital. Someone couldn't reach their kid's school. Panic replaced irritation. Anger replaced patience. The Facebook group went nuclear. People demanded answers. People demanded resignations. People demanded my address. Linda replied once, late, with a single sentence. Unauthorized equipment remains under investigation. I didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m, my internet went out too. That wasn't supposed to happen. I sat in the dark, staring at the modem lights, feeling something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just petty anymore. This was reckless. By sunrise, I had made up my mind. If Linda wanted to play infrastructure games, I was done being polite. Because somewhere between cutting off cell service and risking emergency access, she'd crossed a line that couldn't be smoothed over with laminated notices and smiley emails. And I was about to make sure everyone knew it. By the third day without reliable service, people stopped pretending this was an inconvenience and started treating it like a crisis. I woke up to a printed notice taped to my front door. Not slipped into the mailbox. Not emailed. Physically taped, crooked, aggressive, flapping in the morning breeze like it wanted attention. HOA enforcement action pending. Failure to comply may result in fines, liens, or removal at owner's expense. I peeled it off slowly, careful not to tear it, because at this point I was collecting everything. Every letter. Every timestamp. Every threat dressed up as policy. I drove out of the neighborhood again just to make calls. I felt ridiculous doing it, like I'd gone back 20 years in time. I called the county zoning office first, then the planning department, then, finally, the FCC regional office. I didn't expect much. I expected voicemail. I expected bureaucracy. What I didn't expect was silence on the other end of the line when I explained what the HOA had done. The woman finally asked me to repeat myself. You're saying they installed a transmitting structure without permits, she said carefully, and it coincided with a loss of service for the surrounding area. Yes, I said. And they're blaming my antenna. Another pause. Can you email photos? She asked. I sent everything. The pole. The cables. The sign. The height comparison. The timestamps. I even included screenshots of Linda's emails and posts. She didn't promise anything. She didn't need to. Her tone changed, and that was enough. When I got back home, there were cones in my driveway. Bright orange. Lined up like a petty barricade. A handwritten sign zip-tied to one of them read, HOA access only. That snapped something. I moved the cones. I didn't throw them. I didn't smash them. I stacked them neatly on the curb and parked my truck where it belonged. 10 minutes later, Linda showed up. She didn't bring the clipboard this time. She brought 2 contractors and a tow truck. She announced that my vehicle was obstructing HOA operations. I told her to call the sheriff. She already had. This time, the sheriff wasn't patient. He listened to her. He listened to me. He looked at the cones. He looked at the driveway. He looked at the so-called HOA access sign. Then he asked her to show him the easement. She couldn't. She tried to redirect. She talked about community safety, about emergency services, about cooperation. He cut her off. This is private property, he said. You don't get to block driveways. Her face tightened. Again, just for a moment. The tow truck left. The contractors left. Linda stayed just long enough to tell me this wasn't over. By afternoon, the neighborhood split cleanly in 2. One side blamed me. The other blamed the HOA. Lawn conversations turned heated. People stopped waving. Someone spray-painted fixed the signal on the clubhouse wall. I didn't touch the antenna. Instead, I did something else. I turned it off. Just mine. Completely. Powered down. Disconnected. Within minutes, my phone was still dead. Everyone else's was still dead too. That was the proof I needed. I recorded it. Video. Timestamp. Me unplugging everything. Walking around the house. Walking down the street. No signal anywhere. Then I drove 2 blocks out. Signal instantly returned. I posted the video. Not on the HOA page. On the community forum Linda didn't control. The one people only used when they were already angry. The comments exploded. That evening, a fire truck rolled into the neighborhood. Not for a fire. For a failed emergency call. That changed everything. Firefighters stood in the street, radios crackling, frustrated. Neighbors crowded around them, voices overlapping. Someone shouted that this never happened before. Someone else shouted that the HOA did this. Linda arrived late. She tried to speak. Nobody listened. One firefighter asked a simple question. Who installed new equipment? All eyes turned to her. She said it was temporary. She said it was approved. She said it was necessary. He asked who approved it. She said the board. He asked if the board coordinated with emergency services. She didn't answer. That night, the temporary pole went dark. Power cut. No announcement. No explanation. Just silence. Cell service crept back slowly, unevenly, like it was afraid to return too fast. By morning, it was mostly back. Linda sent an email calling it a successful test phase. Nobody believed her anymore. The county inspector showed up that afternoon. Then another one. Then someone in a suit who didn't introduce himself and didn't smile. They measured. They photographed. They asked for permits. Linda hovered, nodding too much, talking too fast. I watched from my porch as the temporary structure was tagged with a bright red notice. Do not operate. The suit glanced at my antenna. He asked how long it had been there. I told him. He nodded. He said nothing else. By evening, Linda's authority felt thinner. People questioned her openly. Board members stopped backing her automatically. The Facebook group turned hostile toward the HOA instead of me. But Linda wasn't done. That night, another notice appeared on my door. Emergency board meeting. Attendance required. The timing wasn't accidental. She wasn't trying to win anymore. She was trying to drag me down with her. And as I stood there holding that paper, looking at the fading red tag on the clubhouse pole in the distance, I realized something important. She'd gone all in. Which meant when this collapsed, it wouldn't collapse quietly. It would take her with it. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m., which meant Linda had all day to poison the well. By noon, the neighborhood was buzzing again, not with panic this time, but with rumor. People whispered in driveways. Groups formed and dissolved on sidewalk. Every few minutes someone glanced toward my house, then toward the clubhouse, like they were watching two weather systems move closer together. I didn't go into hiding. I didn't rehearse a speech. I spent the morning printing things. Emails. Photos. Screenshot. County codes. FCC guidance. Fire department incident logs. I stacked everything neatly, punched holes, slid it into a plain binder. No labels. No drama. Just paper. At 6:45, I walked to the clubhouse. The room was already full. Every chair was taken. People leaned against the walls. A few stood in the doorway. Linda sat at the front table, flanked by two board members who looked like they'd aged a decade in 3 days. A printed agenda sat in front of her, thick, formal, unnecessary. She started on time. She talked about safety. She talked about visual harmony. She talked about community standards. She talked about how stressful the last few days had been for everyone, especially the board. Then she talked about me. She never said my name. She didn't have to. She gestured toward the back of the room. She described an uncooperative homeowner. She described unauthorized equipment. She described interference risk. People murmured. Not agreement. Not exactly anger either. Something heavier. When she finished, she asked if I had anything to say. I walked to the front. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I didn't even look at her at first. I placed the binder on the table and opened it. I started with the timeline. Date. Times. Notices. The day the antenna went up. The 6 months nobody cared. The sudden vote. The sudden outage. I showed photos of the temporary pole. I showed height comparisons. I showed the red do not operate tag. I showed the video of me unplugging my equipment while the neighborhood stayed offline. I watched faces change as I spoke. Not all at once. Gradually. Like lights turning on in different rooms. Someone interrupted me. Asked why Linda hadn't mentioned any of this. Linda tried to respond. She said the board was handling it. I turned the page. I read an email she'd sent claiming upgrades were complete hours before the fire truck arrived. The room went quiet. A board member leaned over and whispered to her. She snapped something back under her breath. I finished with the sheriff's comment about private property and the fire department's incident report. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't embellish it. I just read. When I closed the binder, nobody clapped. That wasn't the mood. The mood was colder than that. Questions started flying. Why didn't we vote on this? Who approved the poll? Did the HOA risk emergency access? Why was the taller structure allowed but not his? Linda tried to answer. She deflected. She repeated phrases. Temporary. Test phase. Authority. Finally, someone asked the question that mattered. Did you install something that interfered with cell service? She hesitated. Just long enough. That hesitation cost her. The room turned. Not explosively. Not with shouting. With realization. A motion was made to suspend enforcement actions until an independent review. Another motion followed. Then another. Linda objected. She cited bylaws. She cited procedure. The board voted anyway. 3-2. Her enforcement powers were frozen. The meeting ended early. People didn't rush out. They lingered. They talked. They asked me questions. They asked each other questions. Someone apologized. Someone thanked me. Linda left without looking at anyone. The next morning, a county notice was posted on the clubhouse door. Equipment removal required. By afternoon, a crew arrived to dismantle the temporary pole. Real professionals this time. Permits, safety vests, trucks with logos. Neighbors watched like it was a spectacle. Linda didn't appear. Cell service stabilized completely. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. That evening, a process server knocked on my door. He handed me papers and apologized like he didn't want to be there. Linda was suing me. Harassment, interference, defamation, loss of authority. I stood in my doorway, papers in hand, and laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was desperate. She wasn't protecting the HOA anymore. She was protecting herself. And in doing so, she'd just dragged this into a place where laminated notices and emergency meetings didn't matter at all. Court doesn't care about clipboards. Court cares about fact. And for the first time since this started, I felt calm. Because I had those. The lawsuit turned everything upside down. For Linda, it was a last stand. For the neighborhood, it was a spectacle. For me, it was paperwork, deadlines, and the slow realization that this wasn't going to be loud chaos anymore. It was going to be quiet, methodical, and devastating. I didn't panic. I didn't rush to post about it. I called a lawyer. He listened without interrupting. He asked for documents. I sent him everything. He called me back the next morning and laughed once, softly, like he couldn't help it. "This is not the lawsuit she thinks it is," he said. Linda had filed in civil court, claiming my antenna violated HOA rules, caused interference, and that my public statements damaged her reputation. She wanted removal of the antenna, damages, and legal fees. What she didn't realize was that she'd dragged federal communications law into the room and dared it to sit down. The first response we filed was short and surgical. We cited FCC preemption. We cited county approvals. We cited the emergency service incident. We included the do not operate tag photo. We also filed a counterclaim. Abuse of authority. Harassment. Interference with communications. Endangerment. That last word mattered. The neighborhood changed tone overnight. People stopped whispering. They started talking openly. Neighbors who'd avoided me walked up and asked how they could help. Someone emailed me screenshots of deleted HOA posts. Someone else forwarded internal board messages Linda had accidentally sent to the wrong mailing list. They weren't supposed to be on my side. They just didn't like being lied to. Linda sent one last email to the community, claiming she was being unfairly targeted and that legal action was necessary to protect HOA integrity. It backfired. 2 board members resigned within 48 hours. A third stopped responding to her entirely. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing. Linda showed up with confidence. Expensive suit. Perfect hair. A stack of papers thicker than mine. She spoke first. She talked about disorder. About individual actions threatening community harmony. About leadership under attack. Then my lawyer spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't editorialize. He asked questions. He asked why the HOA installed transmitting equipment without permit. He asked why emergency services weren't notified. He asked why my antenna complied with federal law but was still targeted. He asked why cell service failed only after the HOA intervened. Linda tried to answer. The judge stopped her twice. Then he asked to see the evidence. The video played. The emails were read. The red tag photo appeared on the screen. The courtroom felt very small. The judge leaned back and sighed. He dismissed most of Linda's claims on the spot. He allowed my counterclaim to proceed. Linda's face changed. Not anger. Not outrage. Something closer to fear. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. Not many. Just enough. Linda didn't speak. I didn't either. The next week, the FCC followed up. Officially. They requested records from the HOA. They requested vendor contract. They requested internal communications. Linda stopped emailing. The HOA board appointed an interim chair. Then the real fallout hit. The contractor who installed the temporary pole withdrew their license application renewal. The HOA insurance provider sent a letter of concern. The county assessed fines. Linda resigned. Not publicly. Not dramatically. Just quietly stepped down, citing personal reasons. Her lawsuit evaporated. Mine didn't. The settlement offer came in a plain envelope. The HOA would cover my legal fees. They would formally acknowledge my antenna as compliant. They would revise enforcement procedures. Linda's name would not appear in the settlement. I accepted. Not because I needed the money. Because it ended it. A month later, the neighborhood felt normal again. Phones worked. People waved. Someone brought me cookies and apologized again. The antenna still stood behind my garage, unchanged, boring, harmless. The clubhouse pole was gone, leaving a patch of disturbed grass and a lesson nobody wanted to repeat. Sometimes I catch myself looking at my phone bars, still half expecting them to vanish. They don't. Linda moved out 2 months later. I heard she joined another HOA across town. I almost feel bad for them. Almost. Because somewhere, right now, she's probably staring at a rulebook, convinced it gives her power over physics. And if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's simple. You can't enforce authority over reality. Reality always pushes back. Life settled into a rhythm again, which should have been comforting, but instead it felt like the quiet after something big collapses. The kind of calm where you keep listening for echoes. For weeks, nothing happened. No letters. No emails. No surprise visits. The HOA operated like a wounded animal, careful, hesitant, afraid of stepping on another legal landmine. I thought we were done. That was naive. The first sign came in the form of a friendly visit. I was in my garage, reorganizing shelves I hadn't touched since before the outage, when a man in a polo shirt with a logo I didn't recognize walked up my driveway. He smiled too easily. Introduced himself as a consultant. Said he was conducting a community compliance review at the request of the HOA. Interim HOA, he emphasized. As if that made it cleaner. He asked about the antenna. I asked if he had paperwork. He hesitated, then said he was just gathering information. I told him to leave. He did, but not before glancing up at the antenna like it personally offended him. That evening, an email went out from the interim board. A survey. Completely voluntary, they said. About visual clutter. About neighborhood harmony. About perceived technological overreach. Perceived. People forwarded it to me with sarcastic comment. Someone added a meme of a tin-foil hat. Someone else replied all and asked if trees counted as visual clutter too. The interim chair sent a follow-up apology. Then the second sign appeared. A proposal. The HOA wanted to amend the bylaws. Not about antennas specifically. That would have been too obvious. Instead, they framed it as uniform exterior structures. Height consistency. Visual balance. Buried on page 9 was a clause that would have effectively forced me to lower the antenna without ever mentioning it. This time, they didn't come at me directly. They came at the rules. I attended the meeting. So did half the neighborhood. The interim chair presented the proposal carefully, nervously. He talked about moving forward. About learning lessons. About restoring trust. Then the questions started. Someone asked why this hadn't been proposed before. Someone else asked if this was about me. He denied it. Someone read the clause out loud. The room shifted. People weren't angry this time. They were tired. Tired of being manipulated. Tired of feeling like something was always happening behind the scenes. A vote was called. The proposal failed. Decisively. I thought that would finally be the end. Then I noticed the signal flicker. Just once. Late at night. A brief drop. A stutter. Then normal again. The next night it happened again. Short. Subtle. Enough to make you doubt yourself. I checked my equipment. Nothing wrong. I checked community posts. A few people mentioned dropped calls. Nothing dramatic. Then a neighbor knocked on my door. He worked in IT. He said something weird was happening with signal routing. Not a full outage. Something else. Something deliberate. We compared note. The pattern pointed back toward the clubhouse. I drove by late that night. No temporary pole this time. No obvious structure. Just a parked van. Unmarked. Engine off. A cable running inside. I took photos. The next morning, the van was gone. I sent the photos to my lawyer. He sent them to someone else. By afternoon, 2 officials arrived. 1 county. 1 federal. They didn't knock. They walked straight to the clubhouse and demanded access. The interim chair looked like he might faint. Turns out Linda hadn't been the only one with ideas. A former board member, loyal to her, had tried to quietly test signal shaping equipment without authorization. Not enough to trigger alarms. Just enough to remind people who held power. He'd used HOA funds. He'd signed contracts without approval. He'd assumed nobody would notice. They noticed. The investigation spread. Emails surfaced. Messages. Plans. The interim board dissolved itself. A special election was scheduled. The former board member resigned before he could be removed. Charges were discussed. Quietly. That night, my phone stayed solid. No flickers. No drops. The neighborhood breathed again. I sat on my porch, watching the antenna catch the last light of the day, and finally understood something I hadn't before. This was never really about antennas. It was about control. About people who couldn't stand the idea that something existed outside their reach. Linda had been loud. The others had tried to be subtle. Both failed for the same reason. They forgot that systems leave trails. And when you follow those trails far enough, they always lead back to the truth. There was only 1 chapter left in this story. And it wasn't going to belong to the HOA. The special election was supposed to be boring. That was the promise. Clean slate. New board. No drama. Just neighbors choosing neighbors and everyone moving on. The flyers said transparency in big friendly letters. The interim emails used words like healing and rebuilding trust. I almost didn't go. What pulled me there wasn't curiosity. It was instinct. The same quiet alarm that had gone off every time someone said temporary or test phase. Trouble never announced itself anymore. It tried to sound reasonable. The clubhouse was full again, but the energy was different. No whispering. No tension curled under the surface. Just watchfulness. People had learned to pay attention. The candidates introduced themselves. Most were exactly what you'd expect. Retirees. Parents. People who genuinely wanted things quiet. Then the last name was called. Linda. She walked in like she'd never left. Same posture. Same practice smile. Different outfit, but the confidence was untouched. She spoke calmly about experience. About knowing the system. About how mistakes had been made but lessons were learned. She never mentioned the lawsuit. Never mentioned the outage. Never mentioned the fire truck. She talked like none of it had happened. I felt something shift behind me. Low murmurs. Disbelief. Someone laughed, sharp and involuntary. When the floor opened for questions, the room stayed silent for a moment. Then a hand went up. Then another. Someone asked why she resigned if she'd done nothing wrong. Someone asked if she supported the bylaw amendment that failed. Someone asked if she knew about the van. That one landed hard. Her smile froze. She said she had no knowledge of unauthorized activity. She said bad actors sometimes exploited situations. She said she couldn't be held responsible for actions taken after her resignation. I stood up. I hadn't planned to speak. I didn't bring papers. I didn't bring photos. I just brought memory. I asked her one question. Did you ever believe you had the right to interfere with communications to force compliance? The room went very still. She didn't answer immediately. She talked instead. About leadership. About authority. About how communities required firm hand. I asked again. She said she did what was necessary. That was enough. People didn't shout. They didn't argue. They simply stopped listening. The vote wasn't close. Linda lost. Badly. She left early. The new board took over that night. Their first act was simple. They passed a resolution acknowledging the outage, condemning unauthorized interference, and committing to third-party oversight for anything even remotely technical. They asked if I'd serve on an advisory committee. I declined. I didn't want power. I just wanted peace. The final fallout came quietly. Linda tried to sell her house. The disclosure forms became a problem. The lawsuit. The investigation. The fines. Buyers backed out. She tried to rent. The HOA rules changed. She tried to appeal. Nobody answered. One evening, weeks later, I saw a moving truck. She didn't look at my house as it loaded. She didn't look at the antenna. She left without waving. The neighborhood healed faster than I expected. Barbecues returned. Kids played in the street. The Facebook group went back to arguing about trash pickup and firework. Normal problems. I kept the antenna exactly where it was. No one complained. No one cared. That was the real victory. Not winning. Not proving anything. Just being left alone. There was one more thing left to settle though. One final loose end. Not dramatic. Not public. But necessary. Because some lessons only fully land when they're permanent. And Chapter 8 was going to make sure of that. The last loose end didn't arrive with a notice or a meeting invitation. It came in the mail, folded neatly, stamped officially, and addressed to me like it was just another boring piece of life admin. No drama. No threat. Just closure waiting to be opened. It was a letter from the FCC. They thanked me for my cooperation. They confirmed their investigation was complete. They confirmed that unauthorized signal interference equipment had been identified, operated, and removed. They confirmed fines had been assessed and warnings issued. They confirmed corrective measures were now mandatory for the HOA, current and future. Then came the line that made me sit down. Any future interference with licensed communications within the subdivision would trigger automatic enforcement without warning. No appeals. No excuses. No emergency meetings. Permanent consequences. I folded the letter and set it on the table, feeling something I hadn't felt since this all started. Relief. Real relief. The kind that doesn't buzz with anxiety underneath it. The antenna still stood behind my garage, thin and unremarkable, catching the sun like it always had. It hadn't won anything. It hadn't defeated anyone. It had just existed, quietly, legally, stubbornly immune to human ego. That was the irony of the whole mess. Linda thought height meant dominance. She thought authority meant control. She thought rules could bend physics if you wrote them confidently enough. She was wrong. A month later, the HOA mailed out revised bylaws. Clear language. External review requirement. A whole section explicitly forbidding interference with utilities and communications. It was boring. Dry. Exactly how it should have been from the beginning. My name wasn't mentioned once. I liked that. Life returned to normal in small ways. I stopped checking my phone bars obsessively. I stopped archiving every email. I stopped flinching when someone walked up my driveway. Sometimes neighbors would joke about the outage like it was a legend now. Remember when nobody could call anyone? Remember when the fire truck showed up? Remember the pole? They laugh. I laughed too. But there was always a line they didn't cross. Nobody joked about trying it again. Linda's house sold eventually. At a loss. The disclosure followed her like a shadow. I heard she tried to explain it away to buyers. Misunderstanding. Overreaction. Political nonsense. Reality didn't care. The day the moving truck finally left for good, I was in my yard, tightening a loose bolt on the antenna mount. She walked past once, boxes stacked high in the truck behind her. She glanced at the antenna, just briefly, like she wanted to argue with it one last time. She didn't. She got in her car and drove away. That was the real ending. Not court. Not votes. Not fines. Silence. Weeks later, a new neighbor moved in. He asked about the antenna casually, like it was any other object. I explained what it did. He nodded and said it made sense. No drama. No clipboard. No measuring tape. just acceptance. Sometimes at night, when the house is quiet and my phone hums with full signal, I think about how close it came to going very wrong. How easily someone's ego could have cost someone else their safety. How fragile systems become when people forget they exist to serve, not to dominate. Then I stop thinking about it. Because that's the point. The antenna stays. The signal stays. The power stays where it belongs. Not with an HOA. Not with a board. Not with a woman who thought she could regulate the sky. But with reality itself, steady and indifferent, quietly reminding everyone that you can't find your way out of physics, and you definitely can't bully infrastructure into obedience. And if you ever try, it won't be the antenna that brings you down. It'll be everything you forgot was watching.